Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to see everyone.
Hi, Rabbi.
Hi, Kenny. Thank you, Kenny, for the segue. We want to thank Sandy, who's sponsoring the class today in memory of her father, Yechezkel Dov ben Rav Yitzchak Tzvi Halevi, Alav Shalom, whose yahrzeit was recently observed, and I'm glad at least some people here knew him and remember him. So that makes it more meaningful. And thank you, Sandy. If you want to mention anything about him, feel free to do so. But there's no, you don't need to. I don't want to put you on the spot.
Only that my father would have adored your class, and so it's a big nechama for me to be here. Thank you. Thanks, Rabbi.
Okay. Thank you very much, Sandy. Thank you.
Rabbi, before you start, I mentioned that the book went to the typesetter on Monday, Tuesday, I think. So we
That's
hope
wonderful.
to have it back
New
by the
edition.
end of the event, first week in May from the typesetter and go from there. So.
That's great. Thank you for the update, Kenny. Okay, I hope everyone had a good Pesach. Some of you I've already seen, not everyone. So welcome back if you went anywhere. But it's good to see everyone and to continue our learning together. Just to review what we've done so far, we've made it from the very beginning of davening, starting with, the brachos and the morning brachos, and we went through Psukei de Zimra and Shema and the brachos before and after Shema, and through Shemona Esrei. Of course, we didn't touch on every detail, and again, I encourage everyone to if you have a copy of the book, read it and fill in the parts that we're not doing in great detail, but we've gone through Shemona Esrei. So we've covered most of the regular days davening. We do have a little bit more to do, but I expect to finish up this season and this class before Shavuos, and we'll discuss as a group. I would like to find something else that the group would love to learn. Maybe we'll take a break and pick up after a little bit of a break. I'm not sure. You can start thinking if there's something else like this or different that you'd like to learn more about. So again, we still certainly have a number of classes, for davening and for the guide to prayer. But you can start thinking if there are any things you would like to do after that. Okay. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. So we finished Shemona Esrei. So there are a few things in the morning davening post Shemona Esrei that we want to cover that are in the book. And I thought, though, today we would start with Torah reading. Okay, so in this edition, it's on page 193. It is, we're not starting actually in the beginning of a chapter. It's chapter 10 and the second section in chapter 10. So if you have a different edition, again, it will be in chapter 10, and then there's a new section in it entitled the Torah reading. If you have a different section, a different version, you can let me know what the page is just to share with everyone. But in this one, it's 193.
In the green version, it is page 241.
Is that what you have, Linda? Thank you, Louise.
I got my own copy.
Gray and white.
Oh, congratulations. And what page do you have, Linda?
Also 241.
241. Okay. All right. So Torah reading. This chapter we'll discuss it. We read the Torah during the week, Monday and Thursday mornings. We read it on Shabbos. We read the Torah on Yantiv. But the first thing really to point out is that, even though we talk about Torah reading as part of our davening, but Torah reading clearly is not prayer in the sense of, praying to God. We're not speaking, we're not using our own words, right? It's studying, it's reading the Torah publicly, it's studying the Torah publicly. So the rabbi sort of combined it as part of our daily, weekly Shabbos tefillah, we combine Torah and tefillah into this greater experience of serving Hashem, but it is something different. One story to illustrate this, I can't remember where I read this, maybe in one of Rav Schechter's farm, but it was a story with Rav Soloveitchik here in Brookline, and he and the people who are with him got to the Maimonides school for Shabbos Mincha. And this was back in the good old days when there was no Erev. And so normally what would happen, and anyone who knows, has any direct information, please correct me, some sort of janitor was supposed to come and unlock the building. And for some reason, the janitor had not come and the building was locked. And everyone was standing outside waiting what to do. And they're hoping someone would come. No one came for a while. And then Rav Soloveitchik said, okay, so we'll daven outside. Now, part of the issue here is there are different opinions. Must you daven before sunset? Or is it okay to daven mincha a little bit after sunset into Bein HaShmashos, into the twilight period? And Rav Soloveitchik felt very strongly that you had to daven before sunset. Okay, not everyone is so strict about that. And so he said, they were standing outside, they saw the sun going down. And he said, we must daven, you're not allowed to daven after sunset. And so they daven. Now, normally Shabbos Mincha, right? You read the Torah, then you say Shemona Esrei, but they didn't have a Torah. The Torah was in the building. They were locked outside. So he said, we'll just start with Ashrei Vel Zion and go straight into Shemona Esrei. And so they daven Shemona Esrei. And then, of course, as they're davening Shemona Esrei right afterwards, the janitor arrived with the key. And so they unlocked the building and they came in and they got into the building. And then once they're in the shul, Soloveitchik said, okay, well, now let's lane. So now there are a few interesting things about this. So he had them lane after Shemona Esrei, right, which is not the normal order. But also someone asked, and they said, but Rebbe, you just told us you have to do it before Shkia, before sunset. We're now after sunset. You just told us so adamantly you can't do anything after sunset. So how are we now laning? So Rav Soloveitchik said, no, you can't daven after sunset because it's modeled after the avoda, the service in the Beis HaMikdash, which had to be done before sunset. But laning, that's different. That's not part of tefillah. So that had different rules. And, whatever the reasons and sources are, but he said laning you can do during Bein HaShmashos. And so they laned. So I like that story for a number of reasons. But again, it's just to highlight that, laning is really something different. Laning is all of us getting together to study the Torah together. And we'll see that really that is older than davening. Older than our regular tefillos is the idea of laning, of Kriyas HaTorah. Okay, so with that, a little bit of an introduction, let us begin. Again, the section, the Torah reading, and we are going to begin in the third paragraph. Linda's just briefly asking, what about laning at Simchas Torah? You're right, laning at Simchas Torah is it's a later minhag, and it is there are a lot of unique rule breaking details of laning Simchas Torah. It really doesn't follow the regular rules, but we'll see if we have time to discuss that more. Okay, the third paragraph. The Talmud tells us how this added regulation developed, meaning the concept of laning, of our brachos. Those are all things that the rabbis instituted. How did this come to be? So Rabbi Wohlgemuth is going to kind of paraphrase a Gemara. It states that there were 10 regulations that Ezra promulgated. Ezra the Sofer was at the very beginning of the building of the second Beis HaMikdash, and there were 7 takanos, 7 enactments that the Gemara attributes to Ezra. One was that we publicly read the Torah on Shabbos at Mincha, and another was that we publicly read the Torah on Monday and Thursday morning. The Gemara says Ezra enacted it. The Gemara immediately raises a question. But did the regulation to publicly read the Torah Monday and Thursday not originate much earlier? Ezra didn't establish it. It's much earlier than Ezra. The Gemara then quotes a brisa, interpreting Vayelchu Shloshet Yamim Bamidbar, and they traveled, the Jewish people, for 3 days in the wilderness, in the desert. Velo Matsumaim, they could not find water, and they were thirsty, and they complained. Our sages explained that they went 3 days without finding the life-giving sustenance of the Torah. Ein Mayim Ela Torah, there was no other water than Torah. And after the Jews had wandered through the desert for 3 days without Torah, they became tired and rebellious, and that's what they were complaining about. And the Gemara derives from that story, just like a human can't go 3 days without water, the Jewish people can't go 3 days without the Torah. That there's a symmetry between our basic physical and basic spiritual needs. And so then I'm continuing to read. Then Moshe decreed that the Jews should read the Torah on Shabbos. There is no need to read the Torah again on Sunday, but Moshe instituted that they would read on Monday. There's no Torah reading on Tuesday or Wednesday, but then he did establish for Thursday. And in this way, the Jews never went 3 days without hearing the words of the Torah. So this enactment to publicly read the Torah goes back to Moshe's time, way before Ezra. So how can the Gemara say that Ezra established the Torah reading? Let me just keep reading just a little bit. We stated, however, that Ezra introduced the public Torah reading. And now we see that this requirement dates back to Moshe. The Gemara solves this problem by telling us that originally, in the days of Moshe, only one man was called up to the Torah to read just 3 sentences. Or perhaps 3 men were called up to read 3 sentences, corresponding to Kohen Levi Israel. But Ezra elaborated, he built on Moshe's enactment, his directive, by establishing the law that no, you need 3 people, each person needs at least 3 sentences, and altogether you need 10 sentences. In other words, both Moshe and Ezra were responsible for the practice of public Torah reading in Shul, and Ezra elaborated upon Moshe's original decrees. And in addition to the Torah reading on Monday and Thursday, Ezra also introduced a public reading on Shabbos afternoon. So just to summarize a little bit, the Gemara says that no, Moshe was the one who set up the original basic structure of public Torah reading, of Kriyas Torah, on Shabbos morning, on Monday and Thursday. But then Ezra came and Ezra expanded it. Either he expanded it in terms of the number of minimum psukim, or he expanded in terms of the number of aliyahs. But it started with Moshe, and then Ezra expanded it. So either way, though, the idea of Kriyas Torah, of us getting together as a community and publicly reading the Torah, is a very, very ancient practice. This whole thing, basically, he was just paraphrasing a Gemara for us. But any questions so far? Any thoughts? Okay, I do want to read some psukim together. Now, why does the Gemara say that Ezra was one of the key people to enact public Torah readings? So there was a tradition for that. But it is also clearly based on psukim in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. They're really very interesting psukim, and I just want to read just a few psukim together. So I'm going to share my screen, and we will see them together. Okay, hope is this. Okay, so who was Ezra? Ezra was the leader of the Jewish people at the very beginning of the rebuilding of the second Beis Hamikdash. The people had come back from Bavel, but they were very uneducated. Many were married to non-Jewish people. It was a difficult time in Jerusalem. There are many enemies. They're having a hard time rebuild the Beis Hamikdash. It wasn't really such a great time. And a couple times, Ezra and Nehemiah, they try to gather the people together to motivate them, to recommit them to follow the mitzvos, which many were not. And this is one such example. So we're going to read this, and you tell me, you jump in when you see things in these psukim that are reminiscent of how we read the Torah. Okay? So the Navi describes, the Sefer describes, Vaye asfu kol ha'am ki ish echad, and everyone gathered together like one person, El harechov, to the street, Asher lifnei shar hamayim, which is before the water gates in Yerushalayim. Vayomru la'Ezra hasofer lahavi a sefer Taras Moshe Asher tziva Hashem es Yisrael. And they asked Ezra the scribe to go and bring the Torah. Vayavi Ezra hakohen es Torah, and Ezra brings the Torah. Lifnei hakahal, in front of everyone. Me'ish v'adisha, both men and women. V'chol mevin lishmoa, anyone who could understand. I mean, any child old enough to understand. B'yom echad lachodesh hashvi'i, on the first day of the 7th month. We're not studying Nechama right now, but what is the first day of the 7th month? Anyone know what the 7th month is if you start counting from Nisan? Let's see if you get it right. It's going to be an important date, so it's not going to be a random one.
Rosh Hashanah, isn't it?
It's Rosh Hashanah. Very good. The 7th month is Tishrei. So this was on Rosh Hashanah. He was gathering the people together on Rosh Hashanah. Vayikra bo lifnei harachov asher lifnei shar hamayim, and he's reading it in the street. Min ha'or, from daybreak, ad machzis hayom, until midday. So Rosh Hashanah davening should be about half day until chatzos. That's some of a joke. Okay, in front of everyone. Vayod Ezra hasofer al migdal 8, and he stood on a platform, asher asu ladavar, which they made for this matter. So he was standing on a platform higher than everyone else, which is like almost any shul you go to, right? There's a platform. It's higher up from where you lane.
The shulchan.
The shulchan, yeah. Vayiftach Ezra hasefer le'enei kol ha'am, and Ezra opened the book in front of everyone, in front of their eyes. Ki me'al kol ha'am hayaf, for he was higher than them. Ukepischo, and when he opened it up, amdu kol ha'am, everyone stood. What does this sound somewhat like?
Hag ben Galila.
That's right, Hag ben Galila. Now this is before he's going to read the Torah. He opens up and shows the Torah to everyone. But that is still how Sephardim do it today. The original practice was to do Hagba.
We do that at Maimo Minyan.
Oh, Maimo does? Okay, okay.
And every time they bring out, if there's a second scroll, they lift it up again.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
I'm learning lots of things about that place.
Yeah, so now that you say that, I think I was aware of that. But so in the Shulchan Aruch of Yosef Karo, that's how it's described, and I think that's what also all Sephardi shuls do.
They do, and the Italians also.
Okay, very good. Yeah, so all of that, those customs, it's modeled after these psukim, how Ezra was reading the Torah in front of everyone. Vayevarech Ezra es Hashem Elokim Hagadol, and Ezra blesses God. He says a bracha. We don't have the exact text of the bracha, but he says a bracha just like we make a bracha before laning. Vayanu kol ha'am amen amen, and then everyone responded amen. Bimo'al yedehem, lifting up their hands, that we don't do anymore. Vaikdu vaishtachavu, and everyone also fell down and bowed to the ground. Okay, that we don't do anymore either. But there's certainly is a bracha when you say amen.
There's people that when they hold the Torah up will like hold their hands up. A lot of ladies do it, hold their hands up like they're kissing it.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. And even just, Hag ben Galila, the famous thing, people hold up a pinky or a finger. That's always the custom that no one really knows where it came from. But it's very interesting. Maybe there's some echo of Bimo'al Yedehem. They lifted up their hands. Maybe then somehow it is connected to this. That's very,
I've only
very
ever seen ladies do it, but I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's very, very interesting. Okay, Pasuk 8. Vayikra'u basefer b'toras ha'elokim miforash, and so they read from the Torah miforash. That means clearly. Visom seichel. It's a hard phrase, but it seems to me something like, and they explained it. They made sense of it. Vayavinu bamikra, and everyone understood. Everyone heard and understood. This is also, this idea of this explaining is presumably the source for another detail in the Gemara that Rabbi Wohlgemuth didn't mention, that it says that Ezra, besides for adding how many aliyahs and how many people, so he also enacted to have a metorgaman. It used to be the practice that there would be someone who would translate and explain pasuk by pasuk the Torah. So that could be also based on this, that he read Vayikru, they read the Torah. Visom seichel, then he explained it. Vayavinu bamikra, and people understood it. So we no longer do this because if we'd read the Unclus Aramaic, it would just make people more confused, it wouldn't help them understand. And then the psukim continue, not relevant for us, and the people heard, and they did shuva, and they separated for their non-Jewish spouses, and etc. And while this read, there's some very famous psukim, and Ezra tells them, listen, don't be too sad. Al tetzu, don't be sad. Ki chedvas Hashem hima uzchem. Joy in God will be your strength. Right? Ichlu mashmana mushtu mamtakim v'shilchu manos. It's Rosh Hashanah. It's Yantiv. You should eat and celebrate and be joyous in your commitment to Hashem. Okay, so these are the psukim from Ezra, and some details of our laning, of our Kriyas Torah modeled after it. And it's also just interesting, to note. So again, the idea of having public readings of the Torah, it's again very, very ancient, right? At least the days of Ezra and Nehemiah, the very beginning of the second Beis Hamikdash, and the idea of gathering to have a Kriyas Torah, right, predates any kind of set tefillah. The pasuk says they gathered together, and from dawn to noon, he read the Torah to them, and that was their kind of spiritual communal activity. Maybe some people also offered, prayers in their own words, but again, this is way before, there's a set text of our tefillos, way before, Shmona Esrei, Baruchu, Kaddish, the Chazin's repetition. So I think in many ways we think of like sort of davening and Shemona Esrei, and what the Chazan does is kind of like, that's the real tefillah, and then laning is like something added on, which I'm not saying is a wrong way to think about it, but historically it was almost the opposite, right? We first had Kriyas Torah, we first had laning, and then the rabbis added Shmona Esrei and Tefillah and Brachos, etc., and all that stuff to laning. Okay. Please share any thoughts or questions or comments about any of this. Okay. So let's continue with Rabbi Wohlgemuth now. For me, I'm on the bottom of page 194, continuing right where we left off. There were other reasons given by the Gemara for introducing the public Torah readings, meaning not just because we don't want to go 3 days without studying Torah. It quotes the verse, Vayedaber Moshe es moadei Hashem al bnei Yisrael, and Moshe told the Jewish people about the holidays of Hashem. And we emulate Moshe, and therefore the Gemara explains that we are obliged to read the Torah on each of the various holy days. Rashi elaborates further that the commandment is to read a selection from the Torah that is a particularly timely theme. So there's another reason why we lane on Yontif days, at least. We lane on Yontif days, we read a passage from the Torah that's relevant for the day, and that's a way to celebrate, to observe the day. That's the way to, give the proper meaning and atmosphere to the day. You study the part of the Torah that is relevant for that holiday. Okay, continuing. Beyond obligating us to read the Torah at specific times, Moshe also obligated us to complete the reading of the entire Torah each year. And that was accomplished by reading a parsha every Shabbos. Now, that's not exactly a precise formulation. If you look on page 44, footnote 44. I don't know if all of you have the footnotes. I have footnotes in my edition. On the bottom of my page, footnote 44, it says, according to Minhag Eretz Yisrael, the Torah was read in a triennial cycle, a 3-year cycle. And eventually the 1-year cycle to read the entire Torah was universally adopted, meaning Moshe did not enact to finish the Torah in a year. Moshe enacted that on Shabbos, every community should get together and study a portion of the Torah. And wherever you left off the week before, you continue the next week. And in some regular interval, you should be regularly completing the Torah. We nowadays do it in 1 year, but there were different minhagim. Not everyone did it so quickly. Others, thank you, Louise. Others, a comment on that, right? Others did it in a 3-year cycle. Louise mentioned that Maimonides was one of the few shuls in North America, maybe the world, that wanted to make sure that they completed the entire reading of the Torah, even in the last year when we missed many, many weeks. And so they kept doubling up parshas until they made it up. That will go down in the history books. Yes, I'd like to see one other source, very brief source together about this also, because I just find it interesting. I'll share my screen again. And this is, we'll just read one halacha from the Rambam. The Rambam writes, Haminag hapashut, that means the widespread practice. B'chol Yisrael, in all of Israel. Shemashlimin es haTorah b'shana achas, we complete the Torah in Maschilin b'Shabbos, she'achar Chag HaSukkos. We begin the Shabbos after Sukkos. The Koran b'Seder Bereshis, okay, you be with Bereshis. Vashni, on the second week, we read Eila Toldos Noach. We call it Noach. He called it Eila Toldos. Bashlishis, on the third Shabbos, we read Vayomer Hashem El Avram Lech Lecha, El Arz Asher Areka. We call it Lech Lecha. He just again uses the first words of the parsha. The Koran v'Holchan al Seder Azeh, and we continue. Ad Shegomern es haTorah b'Chag HaSukkos. We keep reading throughout the whole year until we'll complete it on Sukkos, meaning Simchas Torah the next year. And then the Rambam writes, V'yesh mi shamash l'mas Torah b'shalosh shanim. But there are others still in the Rambam's day, the year 1200, who, take their time and they use a 3-year cycle. Ve'eno minhag pashut, but that's not the common practice. But it still did exist in the days of the Rambam. They said that was a practice in Israel. Outside of Israel, everyone had a 1-year cycle, but some people in Israel still kept a 3-year cycle. Eventually, I'm not sure exactly when. Eventually, the 1-year cycle won out, and obviously that's what we all do nowadays. But even still in the Rambam's day, in medieval times, there was the more common practice of a 1-year cycle, but there were Jews in different communities who had a 3-year cycle. And so, people wouldn't be on the same parsha. They could be actually quite far apart, right? They could be on a different book of the Torah because one was a 1-year cycle, one was a 3-year cycle. So the original Takan of Moshe didn't have any time limit or any speed. It just said you should go through the Torah in order. You should set aside time on every Shabbos that the community should study part of the Torah, and you should, in a regular way, make it through the entire Torah, and then start again, So I want to review, just restate everything Rabbi Wohlgemuth just said. I'm going to sort of say in the opposite order. So we read the Torah, but depending on the day of the week, there are different purposes for why we read. we read Shabbos morning. The main reason we read Shabbos morning, again, is to be regularly going through the Torah. There's a takana. We as a community should be studying the Torah. The way I think about it is it's like, a book club for the Torah. So every week, you're gonna be a parsha. If you have time, if you're in the book club, you look at it that week over the week, but that we'll all be getting together Shabbos morning to read it out loud together and to discuss it. The rabbi, says a Dvar Torah about it. And that way, hopefully, we're all regularly studying the Torah and doing it every year. So hopefully we become familiar with the Torah. And God willing, after 120 years, we know the Torah fairly well, because we are going through it, we're reviewing it, studying it every week. So that's why we read on Shabbos. On Yontiv, we read, though, for a different reason. That's not to make sure we're going through the Torah. That's to add to the celebration of the day, to add to the spirit of the day. So what should we study on Yontiv? It's a spiritual day. Of course, we're going to learn Torah. So what should we learn? We'll learn something about that holiday. And that's partially how you celebrate the day. And then there's Monday and Thursday laning. The purpose of Monday and Thursday laning is not so much what we lane, but it's that we shouldn't, as a community, go 3 days without studying Torah. That's how we show that it's our lifeline. We couldn't survive more than 3 days without studying the Torah. But the precise thing we study is less important. What we do is we always read the upcoming parsha, but it's not as important. So I'll just give an example. Let's say on a Shabbos morning, somehow we totally mess up and we lane the wrong parsha. And then somehow laning's done, someone realizes we laned the wrong parsha. So what do? You need to lane again the right parsha. Because like we said, like what Maimonides did, the whole point is to make sure we go through the Torah. So we can't miss a parsha. But if on Monday, Thursday, you make a mistake and you don't lane exactly where you're supposed to, so b'diavad, okay, you don't need to lane again. Because the whole point of Monday, Thursday was just so that we have some Torah learning every 3 days. So preferably you lane what's going to be the upcoming parsha. But if you made a mistake, okay, but you still got your Torah in. You won't be 3 days without a Torah study. And so it's less important, if you make a mistake a little bit, what the laning is. So we have the idea of laning, but it has different purposes depending on the day that we are laning. Okay. All right, we're going to skip pages. To page 200. Yes, Rabbi Yuvin, what do you want to add?
Hello, Rabbi. I was going to say the rabbis documented all the different layers of the established practice for reading from the Torah in different generations, and then they added one more. They said no individual should go without studying Torah any day, and they snuck in a little piece of Torah in the beginning of the davening. And so while we're studying the Siddur, there's a little element of Torah study for each person and for all people in the Siddur itself.
That's right. Sounds like you're building a pole as we speak.
Sorry.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that's right. But we always try to combine Torah and Tefillah. Okay, we're going to skip in my addition to page 200. And it would be about the last page in the Torah reading section before there's a new section called Final Prayers. And the paragraph begins, what is the function of the Torah reading in our service? If someone has another, Linda or Louise, if you find that in your edition, I just want to make sure everyone sees it.
Mine on page 250 says, what is the nature of the Torah reading in our service?
And then what the next sentence is, we know that by reading the Torah.
Yep.
Okay, so I guess there's some slight difference in words in the additions, but yeah, that's where we are. So what page was that?
250.
250. Okay, so either 200 or 250. Okay. What is the function of the Torah reading in our service? We know that by reading the Torah, we fulfill the commandment of Torah study. I'm adding, we just pointed out, if it's a holiday, we also are fulfilling, celebrating the day. Rabbi Wohlgemuth continues, if you look around the synagogue during the Torah reading, you will see that some people stand and some people sit during the reading. Originally, everyone stood during the reading of the Torah too, but in the time of the Gemara, it was already permitted to sit during the Torah reading. Just to be absolutely clear, it is absolutely permitted to sit. Some people have the custom to be strict to stand, but the halacha is you may sit. Some people think that reading the Torah in Shul is a reenactment of the experience at Sinai, when everyone was gathered together to hear God give the Torah. And at that time, everyone stood. Vayamdu ha'am, the people stood. Rav Soloveitchik agreed with this opinion and stood during the Torah reading. So this was an idea that Rav Soloveitchik spoke about a lot, that Kriyas Torah is not just studying the Torah, it's not just studying the Torah communally as a group, it is that, but even more than that, it's meant to reenact Har Sinai, it's meant to give a certain experience, it's meant to give a person sort of a feeling and experience of hearing the Torah, of being commanded by the Torah, of the giving of the Torah. And so there are certain practices that are modeled after that as well. Or Soloveitchik explained that's why every Torah reading has a Kohen, Levi, and Yisrael. So why, I don't know, why does it have to be a Kohen, Levi, and Yisrael Aliyah? What's the significance of that? So Soloveitchik explained we're trying to sort of symbolize this is Har Sinai. So if this is Har Sinai, you know, it's not just for the 50 people in the room. You know, we're reenacting Hashem giving the Torah to the entire Jewish people. And every Jewish community is seen as a piece of the entire Jewish people. So every Jewish community can be seen as representing the entire Jewish people. And so we have a Kohen, Levi, Yisrael, as if to say, see, look, we have everyone here. We have every part of the Jewish people. Everyone is represented, and we're standing here receiving the Torah from you, Hashem. So Rav Soloveitchik liked that idea very much, and so Rav Soloveitchik was very in favor of people standing for Torah reading, or at least certainly he personally did. I don't know what he instructed others. Okay, I want to discuss a few of the kind of like practical things about laning. Maybe people have some questions about like the technical ways of how we lane. I was going to discuss some things like correcting. When do you correct? Thank you, Louise. You know, how to get the aliyah. You know, you see some people close the Torah, open the Torah. Before I discuss any of these kinds of technical, practical details, did anyone have any questions about once I'm sort of bringing up these issues?
Why do we have trope at all? Why do we have a prescribed trope? How halachically necessary is it?
I just didn't hear you, Mark. Say it again. What was the question?
To lane with a prescribed trope.
Right.
How halachically necessary is it to, and why we have
right. Right. Very good. So the trup is also very old. The Gemara finds allusion to it in those same sukkim that we read in the very beginning from Nehemiah. The pasuk said, "Vayikra ba Sefer Hashem," and he read from the Torah, Sefer Torah Hashem, something like that. Miforash, clearly, Visom Seichel, and he explained it. But I think the Gemara explains, what does Miforash mean? He read it clearly. What does it mean? He enunciated well? I mean, why does the Navi have to mention that detail? So they say it means, no, clearly, meaning in the right trup, in the right tune. The trup is also a very old tradition, and it's hard to see this for us who are not experts, but the trup can even a little bit change meaning, or at least different. The trup also breaks up every pasuk into phrases, several word phrases. So it's seen as the more correct sort of way to read it also. For example, like, let's say you're reading English, and if I would talk like this, we have an expert Balkori review on the phone. But let's say I would talk to you like this, Mark. Hello, everyone. It is raining. Outside, bring your umbrella. Right? That's not right. So I said all the words correctly, and sometimes you might hear someone laying like that also, right? But obviously that's not the correct way to the proper way is you should say, it is raining outside, take your umbrella, right? So the trup, when read properly, right, it will make you read the psukim in the correct way. So it also obviously is beautiful and adds other things as well. I'll just tell you how much I know, then Reuben will add whatever everything that he knows more than me, especially on laning. So in terms of when you get a Balkari up there, again, the basic halacha is that if a person makes a mistake for the trup, it's you don't have to correct the person, and it's only really necessary to correct. We try our best if the person makes an error that would change the meaning. Now, the problem is you really have to know Hebrew grammar. You have to know dikduk to know what changes the meaning of a word. Sometimes there's some things that do change meanings that many of us are not aware of. And there's sometimes where you can mispronounce a word and it does not change the meaning of the word. It's we only really need to correct when it changes the meaning of the word. We try our best to do that at least. Yes, Reuben, what do you want to add about the trup and laning?
Well, the main, I agree with the rabbi that it makes the song of the Torah felt in a beautiful way. We refer to the Torah as a song as much as a book to study, and that singing the Torah or anything that you study from the corpus of tradition makes it more beautiful and more personal. But the specific tune that you use changes depending on your historical geographical location. So the baseline trup is really a chant which provides punctuation, and the specific melodies or the specific notes that we use have changed depending on how it developed across the different Jewish communities over time.
Correct, sure. So, right, Ashkenazi, Sephardi, Taimani will sound a little bit different. Again, they will be similar in the sense in terms of the basic cadence, like saying like no one's trup is going to tell them to read it. It is raining outside. Get your umbrella, right? So, in terms of the kind of more tune or melody of it, there obviously are differences.
Right. It's the way it breaks up the words and phrases is the same for everybody, and the notes we use to accomplish.
Right. One other thing I'm just remembering now, but does anyone else want to ask anything or something about the trup, about the tune or anything? Yes, Linda, please. You're still on mute, Linda.
I put it in the comments.
I didn't see it yet.
Yeah, it drives me crazy when people mix up nusachim. They do Eastern European mixed with Israeli. I find it very distracting, and it really makes me crazy, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, you're right. People should be consistent. We allow many different pronunciations at the Israel Brook line. But however you pronounce your tough or your suf or this or kamatz or patach, but you should be consistent. It doesn't really make sense to be combining multiple ones. I agree. I did want to just bring up, Rabbi Wohlgemuth has one sentence on this. Right before where we began is about maftir and haftorah, and all Rabbi Wohlgemuth says is, in this edition, maybe there'll be a lot more in the new edition, but he says on Shabbos, fast days, and Yom Tov, we have maftir and haftorah. So we have a little bit extra piece of laning from the Torah, and then we read something from the Navi. Now, the truth is, the reason that we read from the Navi, the original takana and motivation for it, we don't really know. It's been lost to history. You may have heard that, some theorized that it was a time when it was forbidden to study the Torah. And so the rabbis enacted, in place of reading the Torah, we should read the Navi. That's certainly possible, but we don't really have any evidence to know that that is true. I even saw someone point out it's kind of strange. So, whoever it was, the Romans, so they wouldn't let us read from the Torah, but that they would let us read from the Navi. Why would they do that? But okay, but maybe that's one theory. Others theorized, I saw quoted the name of Rav Hirsch, that it was enacted at a certain point in time where there were certain Jewish sects that accepted the Torah, but rejected any other Navi. Said, okay, Moshe is a true prophet, but we don't accept anyone after Moshe. And so the rabbis wanted to, strengthen our belief in the other prophets. So they said every week we're also going to read, something from one of the Nevi'im. Again, we don't really know that that's the reason, but that's another theory. The truth is, even if we don't have a reason, it is also a nice thing. It's a good idea, right? I mean, if we're it's a lot to go through all of Tanakh, but okay, we go through the whole Torah regularly, and they picked some of the key, most important passages of the Nevi'im. Seems like a good idea to me to encourage people to be familiar with key passages in the Nevi'im. So even if just that's the reason, that makes sense to me at least. Originally, in the days of the Gemara, the Haftorahs were not set at all. The Gemara does list the Haftorahs to say on special occasions, like on Yantiv, on the four parshas, like Parshas Shkalim, Zachor, Para, etc. But on a regular Shabbos, it seems like there wasn't a set Haftorah, and whoever was called up for the Haftorah could pick whatever passage of Navi that was relevant for the parsha that he found interesting. And eventually there became a standard Haftorah for each week. But again, it's less important. I'll share with you, in my time here, there was one occasion where somehow there was a mistake and a bar mitzvah boy did not prepare the correct Haftorah. It was a complicated week. It wasn't just like a regular parsha and he prepared the wrong parsha. That'd be a difficult mistake to make. But it was one of these things. It was, Erev Rosh Chodesh, whatever it was. And at least according to, what the Luach says you're supposed to read, he didn't really prepare the right one. But so we had him read the one he prepared. And he wasn't ever told differently. Because and when it was discovered, he would not have been able to prepare the right one. So for Haftorahs, you can do that because the original Takana doesn't require specific Haftorahs. You should read something from the Navi. For your leaning from the Torah, you couldn't do that. If our mitzvah boy prepared the wrong parsha, you can't lane the wrong parsha Shabbos morning. You need to lane the parsha you're up to. But for Haftorah, there's a lot more flexibility, at least, on most weeks. So anyway, so we lane the Haftorah. Haftorahs generally we're not as familiar with, so it's even more important to maybe read the Haftorah and understand it. But we don't really know the reason of why we have Haftorahs. Not that it doesn't make sense. Again, it makes a lot of sense, studying important passages from the Navi, but we don't really know the original reason why it was enacted. Yes. Any other questions about laning? Maybe there's a man who gets an aliyah, man in our group who always wondered about why he does something or doesn't do it or others do it. Let me see what Rabbi Wohlgemuth discusses.
So why is it that if there's no Kohen and what exactly is the process when there's no Kohen? Who gets the Levi, who gets the Kohen aliyah, and why does the Levi not get the Levi aliyah? Or I know my husband's a Levi, and I know he's told me that there's something about not giving the Levi if they don't have a Kohen.
Yep, correct. So the Gemara has a phrase, if there is no Kohen present, nispardu hachavila, which means literally the rope is untied or untwisted, or the rope is broken, meaning once there's no Kohen, then you like the whole ordering no longer applies. On that Gemara, Rashi has two interpretations. Rashi says what that means is the order no longer applies, so you can call whoever you want, Levi, Yisrael, whoever you want. And but Rashi says, but others say no, it means the order no longer applies, meaning you should not give a Levi an aliyah, the first aliyah, and you should go to a Yisrael, because the Levi only gets preference if he's sort of following the Kohen. But if there's no Kohen, the Levi also should not be given preference, and you should give it to Yisrael. In the Shulchan Aruch, we don't follow the opinion. In the Shulchan Aruch, it says you can give it to whoever you want. But there are others who are strict for Rashi. It said since some Rishonim held you should not give it to a Levi, you should not give it to a Levi. You should give it to Yisrael. Maybe not surprisingly, Rav Soloveitchik held like that. So Rav Soloveitchik in general would not want to give it to a Levi. I heard a very good story from Rav Shechter. He said often when he was a young boy in yeshiva, so many times they would have laning, maybe just with the Rav Shir. Kenny could tell me if you ever remember this. And there was no Kohen present. So Rav Soloveitchik is a Levi. So the boys, the Gabbai would go up to give the aliyah to Rav Soloveitchik, and he would say, no, give it to Yisrael. So afterwards, at some point, some of the boys apparently said to him, they said, okay, Rebbe, we understand you normally don't give it to a Levi if there's no Kohen, you give it to Yisrael. But everyone agrees, though, if the Levi is clearly the greatest Talmud Chacham, he should be given the first aliyah because he's the greatest Talmud Chacham in the group. And certainly Rav Soloveitchik qualified for that. So we should give it to you for that. So, but he still said, no, don't give it to me. He said, but why not? And he said, for educational purposes. And Rav Shechter would say that he would impersonate Rav Soloveitchik. I'm gonna do a bad job with like a European accent. For educational purposes, I don't want to take it so that everyone should know you don't give it to a Levi, you give it to a Yisrael. So that's where Soloveitchik apparently instructed people. Again, some people do give it to a Levi. So that's why there's like a whole kind of, your husband's like discussion thing. There's something about whether or not you can give it to a Levi.
Oh, you could for sure see that. No, you have to give it to a Levi. I saw Rav Soloveitchik get the Kohen aliyah once,
Exactly. So that's why so you're right. So that's why he would never want to take it. And he said you should give it to a Yisrael if there's no Kohen.
Because my husband has always wanted to do Maftir Yonah. And he said, he explained to me why. He said it's physically impossible for him to ever read Maftir Yonah ever.
That's correct.
Levi can never.
He's a Levi. Yeah. Kenny, does that sound right? What I said? I don't know if you ever witnessed that, but does that sound right?
Don't know.
You don't know? Okay, that's what
Not in my day.
Not in your day. Okay.
The rabbi leave every Thursday morning when he went to Minyan.
Because there was a Kohen.
No, if there was a Kohen, he got automatically. I don't remember if there was.
There's no Kohen.
But I had a friend who was a Kohen, and I mentioned one time how, we were in a shul for many years that had no Kohen. And every week it was Ein Khan Kohen, and the guy said to me, really? They say that? I've never heard that. And I
Yeah.
said, well, like, duh, if you were there, they wouldn't have said that.
That's similar to if there's a Kohen but no Levi, then the Kohen gets the first two Ilias. He gets the Kohen and he gets the Levi. So I'm a Levi, Louise, like your husband. So I've never seen that either, because I've never been to a minyan where there's no Levi. Because if I'm there, then there's a Levi.
Is it
So
the same person? They call the
same person. Yes,
or?
yes. It has to be the same person. Yeah, yeah. Because we don't want to call another Kohen. That's like a rule. You would never call one Kohen then another Kohen back to back, because then you could give the impression, oh, we're redoing Kohen because we discovered there's something wrong with the first Kohen's lineage, and we never want to, cast aspersions like that. So it's the same Kohen. He just says the brachas again. Yeah. Okay, it is 3:00. So thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon and a great Shabbos. If I don't see you before then. And we'll pick up next week. I think we'll discuss Tachanun and Ashrei Ve'Tzion at the end of davening. I think that's the next topic. Okay, have a great day, everyone. Thank you.